You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brooke-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to claim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. The next way that you can walk that path is by joining Waking the Wild Masculine or Waking the Wild Feminine coming this September. They are potent circles to support you in discovering your soul path, expressing your heart's truth, and rising into sovereignty, all whilst being fully seen and held by a circle of your fellow men or women. It is incredibly powerful, activating magic. Go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWF for Waking the Wild Feminine, which is now open for enrollment and almost full, or primalhappiness.co/WTWM for Waking the Wild Masculine to discover more and register your interest to be the first to get a chance to enroll when it does open soon. The spaces for each are intentionally limited to create the most intimate and powerful experience, and they do fill up fast. So if you're feeling it's for you, take action now to be sure of your place. And now, over to this week's show. It's with Marcela Widrig, founder of Fierce Embodiment. Marcela teaches women to undo old beliefs, hurts and fears, and the way they limit you in your life today. She trained extensively in a combination of somatic bodywork, movement training, breath, and expressive arts, which has given her a rich variety of body-centered tools to guide clients through trauma and emotional challenges to reach those unmet places we all have inside of us. She offers a 4-month signature course called Shifting Shame, an embodied journey to freedom, and monthly movement series and workshops. In this show, we spoke about Marcela's work around understanding how shame is held in the body and how by working through this, we can reclaim power, joy, freedom, expression, and choices. What a fabulous topic. I think you're going to love this one. Let's dive in. Hello, Marcela. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Leanne. Thank you.
Oh, I know already this is going to be such a juicy episode. Just as we started talking about what we could talk about, I was just like, let's just dive in. We've got plenty there. So this, I think, really rich topic of shame. Just before we started recording, you were saying, most people have the opposite reaction of kind of like shame, let's not go there. So how did you end up with this being your work?
Yeah, look, it took me a long time to even identify it as shame. So I've been in this embodiment world for 25 years professionally. And
before it was even known as the embodiment world, I'm guessing.
Exactly. It made it a lot easier to be able to say embodiment now. But the idea was to always work with the trapped fear and the trapped pain that people have. But in the form, in the methodology that I was studying and working with, they actually used shame to push us forward. We were never going to be good enough, and we were never, and I didn't recognize it. I just kept, a bulldog, just fighting, working for it. I finally separated from that methodology, and I separated from absolutely everything because at the time, life wasn't working. It just wasn't working. And here I was supposedly with this wonderful profession and good friends and this really good life in Los Angeles. And I didn't feel I had good enough. Like I just was always failing. So I did a number of things, and one of the main things was I just left my life and I moved to Indonesia. I moved to Bali.
Oh, wow.
And I had this gorgeous little villa right down the road from where they filmed Eat, Pray, Love. I had the most beautiful sunsets. It was just this idyllic thing, right? Like you'd think you'd see it on Instagram today, right? And I was in such deep despair and fear that I was functioning, but I wasn't really living. So I just knew that I was kind of on the right track for what I had to discover, because that was something I had been outrunning, a feeling of not good enough my whole life. So when I finally stopped, it came pouring out of me, just pouring out of me. And I had the circumstances to stay there and to allow it to pour out of me, and because I really wanted to heal this. I thought I just cannot keep outrunning it. When I finally did, and I realized, wow, okay, so what I'm working with is this chronic feeling of not being good enough. And then I started to look at all these clients I'd worked with over the years, and I thought, that was it. That was the key that we never got to. We were always trying to sort of feel better, but we were walking around this deeper wound. So I got to the deeper wound. I thought, what is this deeper wound? And that was when I recognized, oh, it's what we call shame. So how do I heal it in myself? What does that even mean? And then that brought me to, doing that really specific work that I do now with shame.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful story. I can so feel the depth in that. And a couple of things occurred to me. One, that it's, I think, rare enough anyway in the kind of like personal development, spirituality world where people are prepared to go kind of down into the wound. Usually we are busy kind of like cementing over the top of it, or just ascending away from it. So it's like, let's pretend it doesn't even exist. So I think it's rare enough actually to recognize there's real jewels in descending to the wound. But I think through that lens that your work is around, in terms of specifically around embodiment, I think it's even rarer. So yeah, oh gosh, I'm so glad you do what you do without even knowing more. So
it is rare. And, I have a lot of people send me podcasts and things that they've listened to with psychotherapists talking about shame. And I'm listening and I feel myself getting crazy impatient, because I think, how are they not mentioning the body?
Yes.
All. How is that possible? Because when we were little, we didn't understand we were being rejected or abandoned or left out. We just felt it. And then we had to build the coping mechanisms to deal with it. And that feeling came in the body. And it's still held in the body. Yes, it has beliefs and it has, yes, it has all of that, but it is in the body. You cannot constantly talk your way out of it. You can't positive think your way out of it. That will be because that means that you have to keep going back to that because you haven't gone to the deeper wound.
Yes. I really love how you've named that. Yeah, it's like, on the one hand, embodiment as a kind of means to integrate, expand, illuminate has been really misunderstood and dismissed until fairly recently. And then there's this, what we've just been talking about in terms of the wound, the shame, and then the two together. I agree with you. Before we even started recording, you're like, how on earth can we do anything with shame without going into the body? And I completely agree. I mean, so much of it is pre-verbal, and it's helpful to be able to relate to it in an intellectual way, to be able to word it, but not without also involving the body. So yeah, makes sense.
I had a really sweet story that I'll share. I was talking with my brother and my nephews, who are 6 and 9, and they are in Indonesia. They're being raised in Bali. Very sensitive, wild little boys. And my brother's trying to get them stay connected with their family overseas, and we're very close. But he said, ask your aunt, didn't I tell you about her work? And so this little 6-year-old says, yeah, she teaches women, and it was the cutest thing in the world. She teaches women how to work with their anger and their hurt. And then the 9-year-old says, and shame. And I said, well, do you understand what that means? This little boy. And he said, well, yeah. And he's very thoughtful, and he waited for a moment, and he said, and his chest kind of deflated in the telling of the story, right? And he said, well, the other day, somebody that he loved said something about me, and it made me feel bad, right? Got teased or something like that in a careless kind of way by somebody who's supposed to love him. That's a very subtle cut, right? But it was physical. So he, in the moment, he couldn't have just said, he's 9, it's not, I feel ashamed and now I don't want to feel ashamed. But so in the deflation of the chest, that was where my focus was. And so we continued the conversation and laughing and pulling until I was clear that his chest filled back up again to its actual size. So there's little cuts that happened, but there's also, of course, the bigger traumas that leave their mark.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Sorry, Karen.
No, I was just going to say, and the mark is what happens is that the way that we relate to it is we disconnect from our bodies, right? So his chest deflated. So in essence, in a very small way, he disconnected from his natural joy, his natural playfulness, right? And if that happens again and again and again, that becomes the way that he deals with life.
Yes, that becomes like the pattern of the body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why the body has to be. It's a crucial part of this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel that we've kind of defined shame as you talk about it fully, or do you feel there's more there to illuminate first?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Like, how would I define it for people?
Yes. Well, I was just thinking, we've obviously kind of dancing around shame so far, but do you feel is there anything else you would like to say in terms of defining what you mean when you talk about shame before we continue?
Sure. And of course, people have to find the words that resonate for them. But in a general sense, it is a disconnect from self. It's a disconnect from yourself and from your feeling of belonging and place in the world. It shows up as, I'm not good enough, nobody wants me, I don't belong, I'm odd and left out. It can manifest as removing yourself in some way from engaging, from connection, from intimacy, from trust. So that's how I define it. But I do spend time when I work with people, how use your words. How would something that chronically you believe about yourself in reflection to the rest of the world and others?
Yeah, I'm so glad I asked you that question. I love how you define it, and also completely recognize that, again, because we have an allergy really to this whole thing around shame. In fact, that reminds me of something you talked about earlier before we started recording, the shame of our shame, that we might have an inkling of it in our own language, but might not have realized it's shame. So I can really feel that, but it does completely make sense ultimately that this is a disconnection or a separation between who we be in the world and who we could be, like the fullness of ourselves, a closure or disconnection. Yeah.
Because if you walk around in the world with a deep belief that somehow you're not truly wanted, right? And it's not that these beliefs are playing out in the head constantly. They usually turn up the volume in certain situations. But let's say that it's on really low volume in the background. that I'm not wanted. You walk around in the world, I'm not wanted. That will affect what you do, what you don't do, who you love, who you won't love, the choices that you make about your profession, your lifestyle. It is a thread of reduction that goes through your entire life because you're holding it in your body.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, so it's not even visible most of the time, even though it's creating your life almost all the time. It becomes the water you swim in.
Exactly. That's a beautiful way to put it, right? And you're swimming around in this pond that, let's say, is like, well, sometimes it's okay, but there's another pond over there that keeps pulling your attention. And the gap that's stopping you right there is your experience of shame and your belief structure and how it's gripped in your cells. Because maybe that pond is the ocean that you were always meant to swim in. Maybe it's just a comparison because life today is full of comparison and it's not for you at all. But let's say until you step out of that place you're swimming around in and you start to look around, you may not actually go towards what is a natural expression of you.
Yes.
So
yeah.
One of the beautiful things about unpacking shame is that, you have to pull out the things that hurt and the things that, that pulled you away. You can't go into it with thinking it's going to be a skip along, but the body has the capacity to contain it. But the beauty that I discovered is that when you unpack it, you also find the treasures that you left behind a long time ago.
Yes. Let's get to that. So that's been completely my experience, both personally and the work we do with people, where it's completely understandable that people wouldn't want to travel to these places of shame. And yet what's there is always real gold. And we need to go there to get the gold. So I'd love to hear, like, what have you seen that gold can look like?
Oh, wow. Like women learning to say no, women choosing a profession they've always wanted to do, stepping into a relationship and enjoying their body in the sexuality of it, even though I don't focus on sexuality. But if you are more embodied, you are more naturally drawn to that. It is, I've seen women completely change their profession. I've seen women become public speakers and teachers because and they had always wanted to be, right? It just simply means freedom in any direction. So it can be freedom to live the way you want to live, despite all of the cultural conditioning. Freedom from like economic status or marital status or coupleship status, or do you have children or not children, all these little places where we have been taught that somehow if we don't have A, B, C, D, something's wrong with us.
Yes.
So then we're seeking A, B, C, D, and I'm saying no, wait, let's go to that feeling inside of you that something's wrong with you. Let's open that up in the body and feel whatever you need to feel in the moment, and let that integrate into the body, and then see what you actually want.
Oh, right? Yes.
So it's a whole different direction.
Yeah.
I spent much of my 30s and until like my mid 40s, I would say, trying to not be single, because being single was such at least in the US, it's such a horrible status, right? There's always a something wrong with you status. Today, it doesn't even occur to me, right? I'm living the life that I want to live, and it's full and it's rich, and that wound is not there anymore.
I love what you've just said. What I see over and over is we, of course, have all of this cultural conditioning, And that's going to remain there for at least the foreseeable future. But this kind of work liberates us to not live life according to it. And that's very much what I've seen in the work that we do. But I love how you've described it, is that, yes, that's still going to be, it's not like those messages are going to go. And yet we find something deeper, something more powerful that we can live our life from. And so we're no longer being dictated to by these cultural beliefs or even our family's beliefs. So that's also, I think, important. There's the sometimes that was the wounding. Sometimes the shame came from our family's beliefs about what was the right way to live. But I'm sure you've seen the same. I noticed that as we do this work, we can also still choose that deepest part of ourselves, even in the face of that family conditioning of like, this is how the right way to live is. So I'd love to see if that's, I'm sure it is, what you've seen too.
Oh yeah. But here's the thing. It's if it's truly healed in your body, you don't have to justify it anymore. You just are how you are, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times when it's semi-healed, let's say, there's still the negotiation that's happening with family. Mm-hmm. So the profound shift, and let's call it acceptance, first has to happen in you, so that it doesn't even leave any room to have to defend your position with family if you're trying to do something different. You don't have to spend your time pleasing and then going off and living your life anyway, right?
Yes.
You just are actually filling your skin and being exactly who you were meant to be. And that may go contrary to how your family thinks it should be. But if it's whole and it's complete, it really doesn't matter.
Yes. Oh, right? Yes. There's something quite magical I find about that. It's like the kinds of conversations that we can imagine would need to have to justify our decisions just don't seem to occur, or certainly don't occur anywhere near as frequently as we believe they will. There's almost like an energetic that forms around when we're living fully. Other people just seem to feel that and allow it. It seems to be so powerful. It seems to ripple out into others, where we just don't seem to need to be in that kind of like, oh, I'm doing it because it's right for me, blah, blah, blah. It just doesn't seem like those conversations need to be generated.
Exactly, because it's not like what we are still working with. Let's say the hidden parts, that of say that I am, I don't know, say that I choose to be a Buddhist and my family is Catholic, right? Choice of mine. If I feel like I'm doing something wrong that's not allowed and that's going to be looked down upon, and I hold that little piece inside of me still, but I'm still practicing my Buddhism, right? And I love my Buddhism. Then I'm still defending that. I still will have to go back. If I let go of that, I am absolutely free just to do whatever I wish to do. Mm-hmm. So those places of defensiveness are really telling.
Yes. Yeah.
They're like, oh, there's a place where you haven't actually fully let go of the belief or the should or the, what was passed down to you. There's something in you, and it's not something that you can negotiate from your mind.
Yes.
It might be something that you're holding deep in your belly. It might be something you're holding in your solar plexus. You're squeezing your hips. If you let that go, you might feel waves of heat, shaking. You might translate it into, oh, that's anger, that's rage, that's this, that's that. Doesn't matter. The body doesn't care. And then you just fully occupy your place. Your choices, your decisions, your directions.
Yeah. Oh, I love this conversation so much. So you mentioned about the idea of the shame about our shame. I'd love to hear you say more about that.
That is often a starting point for me, and it's a big hurdle, right? So if you look at a lot of women today, there's shame in the body, there's shame in their belief system, however they name it. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not. or I'm too much. That's also, the opposite of it. But there's the trying to hide that belief in the body. And then you may hide that by overachieving, by never asking for help, by, feeling weak, but going into your private space to feel the weakness and allow the weakness, put yourself back together to go out into the public, right? So there's a thicker layer of behavior that is trying to hide the shame. So that's what I'm calling the shame of the shame. So that is a layer that I work with through the body, right? So if your tendency is to be an overachiever, or always be right, or constantly work overly hard, or obsessively work, let's look at that in the body. How does that appear? Because it's a pattern. And then once you take those layers off, that's when the fear wakes up of not being accepted or wanted or okay in the world. And so we have to, that's the shame of the shame. Even, I have people that have taken the workshops with me and now the course that I teach, and they're embarrassed to tell their friends. That's the shame of the shame. Right. So can you start to practice talking about it a little bit more? So I've asked people oftentimes, what would you do? Little things, little life things. What would you do if it weren't for shame? If that belief structure and the way you hold it, it's more than a belief structure, but the way that you hold it in your body, if that weren't there, what would it free up? And I've had the sweetest responses. One woman said to me she would flirt more, right? One woman said she would wear skirts. So the shame of the shame didn't allow her to wear skirts. The shame was always there, so she just wore pants. The shame was always there, so she just made sure this woman actually made herself a little bit more dulled down, like energy-wise. And I remember specifically when she said she would flirt more, this bright energy, just like this flush, went up through her body. So for your listeners, you can start to think of those simple things of what is one little thing that you would do, not big. Do not dive into the bigness unless you've got the support and the guide and the tools. But what's one little thing you would do
I love that.
Shift that? And in the beginning of my journey, what I did, because part of what pushed me towards it is that I started to go through menopause, and that woke up all kinds of shame of being too old, shame of my body changing, just shame. I had more hot flashes than I care to remember. And I would be out meeting people, or even going on a date, for dinner, and I would have a hot flash and start dripping sweat with somebody I barely knew. I couldn't stop it, right? That was just there was nothing, there was no reorganizing. And so I had to learn, I have to just relax into this and express that I am going through menopause. That was my act. And it can maybe today seem like no big deal, but wow, 7 years ago, that felt like such a scary edge. So wearing skirts for some women, no big deal. But for that woman, it was a scary edge. It meant showing her legs. She had history in her legs that they were too fat and they were unattractive and they were this and they were that, right? So, but she wanted to wear skirts. And she started to afterwards, and she had the most beautiful array of skirts. She would send me pictures.
Oh, how gorgeous, how gorgeous.
Yeah.
In that instance, when there's a kind of seeming like surface level shame, as in a shame of her legs, which is why she then need to wear trousers, would in that instance there be a kind of deeper shame beneath that, if that makes sense? So the kind of like top level is like, my legs aren't good enough. Is there a deeper level of shame than that?
Absolutely. But for many, many people, their body image is the key thing for them, right? They're so ashamed of their body. So initially, just getting her to show her legs was a big step. The next step would be to begin to feel like, what is the history that's held there? Where was there abuse that happened? Was there, either verbal or actual physical or sexual abuse? Was there humiliation that was happening about her being a girl, a woman, moving into adulthood? So we would go into that for sure. That's the deeper stuff.
Yes.
But what I found is that women, we've been taught to disconnect from our bodies in our physicality, and we have the world is structured in a very masculine way. It's logical, it's linear, it's fast paced. We're supposed to keep up. When we come back to our bodies, that is not our nature. We are meant to be slower, to move, not all the time, but to have more options. And so that is something that we've lost as women. To just get back to the body and start to feel the body is already a big step. Yes. Once you start to trust that you can hold what you feel, right? Then we go deeper in and go, okay, well, how do you hold this deep belief that you are, in her case, if I remember correctly, that she was just worthless, right? It showed up in and through her legs. But when we went further and deeper into it, she started to feel her body more, and she knew how to work with her body. She recognized, oh, there's a belief that I'm worthless, that I shouldn't even be here, right? And then we look at that, and we don't just understand it from a mental perspective. I look at it and go, how does that feel in the body? Where is it? And for her, it was a lot of shaking in her legs that was starting to wake up, that she had learned to clamp down on by contracting her groin and her hips and her stomach. And then she just got by. And that's that undercurrent that we spoke about a little while ago. She had to create that effort in her body just to live her life.
Yeah.
And then she began to undo it, and wow, I remember she left her marriage. She joined this graduate program she'd always been wanting to do, and she started wearing skirts.
Yeah. Oh, I love everything you've just said. My sense is that whilst the shame's held in the body, so much of the wisdom, what's needed to heal, is also held there. And is, by being willing and able to come back into relationship with the body, so much of the solutions are in the body too. It's like as soon as we open up, they become available. It's not like we then have to sort of go hunting out there to kind of somehow do something with it. So much of it arises, has definitely been my experience. I'd love to hear you say a bit more about that.
Well, yeah, there's a number of directions I could head with what you're saying, but what I would suggest first is that I look at the body as something that we are either, I look at embodiment, right, as we're embodying all the time. So embodiment isn't a goal. And sadly, in the way that it's kind of running down the snowball effect, everybody's trying to become better embodiers. But we are either, if I just take shame itself, we can either contract around shame or we don't. That's it. It's not good or bad. We are either contracting around it or we're not. And so if you can learn to uncontract, to let go, to soften, to occupy the body and the energy that will open up. And that's the edge that I talked about. Because if I go back to when we were little, things happened. You were saying how it happened often pre-verbally, but it happened, I would, up through our teenage years, I would say, is where we're still really pulling it in and soaking it in. And later, but predominantly there. But we're just learning how to navigate life at that point. And so somebody embarrasses us, humiliates us, puts us down, we have to learn, how do I cope with it and be safe right now in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
We learn to contract. And in the contraction, we reduce the energy of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
If the energy was a lot of fear, a lot of pain, a lot of, let's call it humiliation, we don't want to show that to others. Shame is very much relational. So we contract it down. So part of what I work with is just becoming physical. But the other aspect of it is, how do you undo those contractions? And then in the undoing of the contractions, you'll start to feel. You'll start to feel things that have been previously uncomfortable. Can you allow that even for 3 more breaths? And ultimately, can you allow it just to run its full course? When you allow it to run its full course, something from your past in a physical way, and it really it completes itself, and you don't have to keep reliving it and to keep negotiating with, wait, how am I supposed to behave in this moment? Right? You just have the strength and the trust and the capacity of the container of your body. One of the things that gets in the way, though, I think, is now with the embodiment world, is that everybody wants to understand it from the mind and to do it quickly, right? And we want to explain it like, oh, I hunch my shoulders. What's that all about? Well, I don't know. Let's, like, look up
on a graph.
I just met you and I don't have my recipe book here, right? So I'm like, well, first, like, pay attention to, when is it that you contract your shoulders? First, do that. Notice where it happens. And then if you contract your shoulders, let's and you recognize it. So let's do that a little bit more and start to notice, maybe that's connected to the way you hold your stomach and your chest. And as I work through the depths of it, I'll go into, like, okay, so now just notice, when you take this shape, what you believe about yourself or about the future, about your life, how you feel about yourself. That's when those definitions come up. Well, I feel, stupid, for example. Okay, so you feel stupid, and that's held there. All right, so let's see now, if you just hold that belief for a moment, contracting the body, and then you start to undo. And there's a lot of ways I can guide, but then you start to undo it. You might reach that point of old pain when somebody put you down in class, or somebody told you that you'll never learn this. You're dull and you're dense, or, somebody made fun of you because you were an eager student. We've been taught not to be eager students and too eager, for example, right? So that's when the fear might wake up. That's when the past rejection, the hurt might wake up. And so that needs to be given space, and it's a learning process. It's not, all or nothing. So, but I've been talking, and I kind of forgot your question.
It's fascinating. Yes, you were talking about the kind of, I guess, that, like, intelligence and the natural healing of the body. You reminded me, I can't remember which book it is in, actually, but I think it was possibly Waking the Tiger, about kind of allowing the cycles of experience to be completed, and how that's often what gets interrupted. So you reminded me of that in what you were saying, as in the natural intelligence is in those cycles, as in naturally we wouldn't just get stuck partway through in the contraction. You also made me think of how, I guess, embarrassment is a factor or close cousin or a cause of shame. And I was thinking that one in particular, I was just thinking about how you were saying, when we feel these emotions, we don't want the outside world to see it. And I was thinking of embarrassment in particular. I remember, particularly as a teenager, that was the worst thing you could do if you were embarrassed, to then show you were embarrassed. Oh. And so
much teasing, ha ha ha. But, when you're turning red, you can't hide it. And then you become splotchy a lot of times when you're trying to contract it, right? And I look at embarrassment, and this is something that so many people feel when they want to speak up, when they want to, never mind speaking in public, but just draw attention to themselves. Embarrassment will come up. And to me, and it's heat, and I do think it's a cousin of shame. And I like to look at it as this burst of courage that your body has right then, because you are going to that edge. And then the choice is to just relax into it and say what you want to say.
Yeah, which is going to be completely the opposite for most of us as a team, where it's slightest bit of embarrassment, like, oh, quick, contract around it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it has a lot to do with taking your actual space, right? This is the freedom that I spoke about when you said, well, what can happen? It means that you speak easily, you talk, you don't unnaturally shut yourself down. So that you're just natural expression. However it is in the moment, you interact with life in the moment instead of from your past.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. So we're almost out of time. I'd love to know if you've got any, I guess, like next steps. And again, I totally appreciate it's not like you want to like plunge listeners straight into the kind of depths of this work without them having that kind of holding. But as in a kind of like first next step, what would you suggest that people can do to start to understand how shame is showing up for them?
Well, I would look at a chronic reactions, I guess, that are happening in their lives that they know about. For me, the doorway was I was constantly anxious, right? So that was a door. I started to look at, well, where is this happening? I became very curious about it. Where is it happening, and what do I lose out on? Because that's what I'm moving around the world with. If I'm always moving around the world anxiously, because I was one of those people that I would do it anyway, right? I wouldn't retreat. I would do it anyway, but I would do it. It would become so much effort and so exhausting and take all the joy out of what I actually wanted to do. So there's a way of just starting to put attention on, where do I constantly end up? What is that chronic thing? And what do I lose out on? And I get very specific. It's not, whenever I talk to people, right? It's like, when I go talk to this kind of person in this kind of scenario. So what that does is it starts to crystallize areas where both you want more strength and more courage and more trust, but it doesn't overwhelm you. Because otherwise it can just be so overwhelming when you start to look at it. So when you start to get specific and think, it's when I want to ask for something that I need from my partner. Right? So once you identify it, you can start to do something very simple as, okay, well, feel your feet on the ground, take a few breaths, and meet that edge of asking for what you need. Be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable. And these are just little tips, right? For the deeper work, I've got a course that people can join, but for the deeper work, you work one-on-one with somebody, or start to do workshops that get you more physically inhabiting your body. And that way you're kind of doing the reps to go deeper.
Yeah. I think anything that's taking us in that direction of feeling more, feeling our bodies, being in our bodies is going to be helpful. Yeah, so I love that. And where specifically can listeners find out about you and your work and what you're offering?
Well, my main website is fierceembodiment.com.
Great name.
Thanks. And normally I have lots of activities, but I'm in the midst right now of teaching a 4-month course called Shifting Shame, an Embodied Journey to Freedom. So I've cut down a little bit on the other activities, but I do teach a monthly movement series, which is all about getting in your body, dropping into physicality. And then I normally teach monthly workshops or every once in a while about boundaries, about rejection, about emotional power for women. And I'll be starting up the Shifting Shame Journey again in September. So what I can say is to hop onto my email list, and you'll get what I'm doing. And I also do give tidbits of practices, and I have a lot of resources for simple body practices, just to start to encourage that connection and that relationship.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcela. This has been an absolute joy. I've really enjoyed this, and I suspect listeners will too. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, I love that. Here are my best bits. In order to integrate what's been held in shame, we have to include the body. Given that's where shame is held, how could it be any other way? Because being in connection with our shame is so hard and painful, we will have mechanisms to protect ourselves from feeling it. So the shame of our shame can actually be the first place to look instead. To take a step on this journey, notice your chronic reactions. What do you constantly find yourself doing? That is a door. Then notice how it shows up in your body and see if you can plant your feet on the ground, breathe and move into the experience. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 324. And if you're feeling the call to either Waking the Wild Masculine or Waking the Wild Feminine, go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM for Waking the Wild Masculine, or primalhappiness.co/WTWF for Waking the Wild Feminine. And you can find out more, enroll for Waking the Wild Feminine, or register your interest for Waking the Wild Masculine to be the first to get a chance to enroll when it opens. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode straight to your device as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.